AITA for telling my ex's sterile affair partner to have her own daughter if she wants to share cheerleading with one. This story spans several years of complicated emotions, betrayals, and difficult co-parenting. My ex-husband, 44M, and I, 40F, have 2 children together, a 10-year-old daughter and a younger son. Our marriage ended in a particularly messy way when my ex cheated on me with Jen, 42F, a woman who had inserted herself into our lives under the guise of friendship. Years ago, when my kids were still very young, my ex started having an affair with Jen. She wasn't just some random woman. She was dating someone in my ex's friend circle, and deliberately made a point to get close to me. She acted like she wanted to be my friend, asking about my life, my kids, and my marriage, all while sneaking around with my husband. When I found out about the affair, my world crumbled. They didn't just betray me, they betrayed my kids too. My marriage ended, and my ex eventually married Jen. Since then, I've focused on rebuilding my life and raising my children. My ex gets the kids 6 days a month, a schedule we agreed on, because of his frequent out-of-state work trips. It ensures the kids are with me or their dad, not left with babysitters or Jen. Jen, as I learned through them, is unable to have children. They shared this tidbit unprompted, hoping it would soften me and encourage me to share my kids with her. I refused. I made it clear I wasn't interested in playing happy families with the woman who helped destroy mine. I also made it clear to my ex and Jen that I wouldn't tolerate them pressuring our kids into relationships or activities they didn't want. Recently, my daughter, 10, came to me visibly upset. She told me Jen was pressuring her to join a cheerleading group Jen volunteers with. My daughter didn't want to do it and asked me to help, because she knows extracurricular activities require agreement from both parents. Jen, as it turns out, was a big cheerleader in her youth and has been volunteering with local cheer groups for years. She seems to have this dream of sharing cheerleading with my daughter, but my daughter has zero interest. I immediately reached out to my ex, reminding him that our daughter cannot be forced into any activity against her will. I asked him to stop pressuring her and to tell Jen to back off. Instead of responding through the co-parenting app as required, he called me and cursed me out, claiming I was making a big deal out of nothing. I honestly thought the cheerleading issue would fizzle out after I made it clear to my ex that our daughter didn't want to join. I figured he'd let it go and talk to Jen about respecting boundaries. Clearly, I underestimated both of them. A few days after my conversation with my ex, I ran into Jen while I was out grocery shopping. At first, I didn't even notice her. I was focused on my list and trying to get through the store quickly. But then I heard her voice behind me. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked, stepping in front of my cart. I sighed inwardly. I didn't want to cause a scene, so I nodded. "What do you want, Jen?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. She launched into this whole speech about how I was punishing her by not letting her bond with my kids. She said I needed to let go of the past and stop holding grudges, because it was hurting the children. "I've been in their lives since they were little," she said. "I'm not trying to take your place, but I have every right to share my life with them and build a connection. Cheerleading is something I'm passionate about, and it's a great opportunity for my daughter. You're being unfair by standing in the way." I stayed calm, but inside I was fuming. She was acting like this was about bonding, but I knew better. It wasn't about my daughter's interests. It was about Jen's unfulfilled dream of having her own child to share cheerleading with. "Jen," I said, "this isn't about me or you. This is about my daughter, and she doesn't want to do cheerleading. Forcing her into something she's uncomfortable with isn't building a connection. It's disrespecting her boundaries." I expected that to end the conversation, but Jen wasn't done. She started following me down the aisle, saying how I was depriving her of the chance to have a meaningful relationship with her stepdaughter. "She's not just your daughter, you know," she said, her voice rising slightly. "She's my husband's daughter too, and that means I get a say in her life." That's when she shifted gears and started talking about herself. She told me how much cheerleading meant to her growing up, how it gave her confidence, and how it's her dream to share that experience with a daughter. Her tone became almost pleading as she said, "This is the one thing I've always dreamed of, and you're taking it away from me." I was at my breaking point. I stopped pushing my cart and turned to face her. Jen, if you want to share cheerleading with a daughter, then have one of your own. But leave mine alone. She's not here to fulfill your dreams or give you the life you think you're owed. The look on her face was a mix of shock and hurt. For a moment, I thought she might start crying, but instead, she just turned and walked away. After I got home, I kept replaying the interaction in my head. On one hand, I felt justified. Jen needed to hear the truth. On the other hand, I knew my comment about her having her own daughter was harsh, especially given her infertility. But at that moment, my priority wasn't sparing her feelings. It was standing up for my daughter. That evening, I started receiving messages from my ex, accusing me of being cruel and deliberately hitting Jen where it hurts. He said I should have been more understanding, and that Jen just wanted to connect with the kids. I didn't respond. I felt like nothing I said would get through to him anyway. After the tense confrontation with Jen at the grocery store, I thought maybe my ex would step in and help de-escalate things. Unfortunately, that was wishful thinking. Instead of talking to Jen about respecting boundaries, he came at me with a flurry of messages, making it clear he was fully siding with her. The first message arrived late, that evening through the co-parenting app. It started with, "Do you really have to be so difficult all the time?" From there, it turned into a tirade about how I was being unreasonable and controlling. He accused me of holding on to resentment over our divorce and using the kids as a weapon to hurt him and Jen. "You know Jen just wants to bond with our daughter," he wrote. "You're the one making this into a bigger deal than it has to be. Cheerleading is good for kids. It teaches discipline, teamwork, and confidence. You should be thanking her for wanting to involve herself instead of pushing her away." I took a deep breath before replying, because I didn't want to fuel the fire. I calmly reminded him that our daughter had made it clear she wasn't interested in cheerleading, and as parents, our job was to respect her choices, not force her into activities to satisfy Jen's unmet dreams. He didn't take that well. The next message was even angrier, accusing me of being jealous of Jen and trying to sabotage their relationship with the kids. "You need to let go of your bitterness and let Jen be a part of their lives. She's been nothing but good to them, and you're just making this harder for everyone." At that point, I decided to stop engaging. There was no point in arguing with someone who refused to see the bigger picture. I logged out of the app for the night and tried to focus on spending time with the kids, but I couldn't shake the frustration. The next visit, when the kids went to their dad's house for their next scheduled visit, I was on edge. I had warned my daughter to stay firm and let me know if Jen brought up cheerleading again. I also told her she didn't have to engage if the topic made her uncomfortable. She could politely say no and walk away if needed. Sure enough, when she came home, she told me Jen had tried to bring it up again. She said it would be so much fun, and that I'd love it if I just gave it a chance, my daughter said. But I told her no, and I don't think she liked that. According to my daughter, Jen kept pushing, talking about how great cheerleading was, and how it would be a special thing for the two of them to share. When my daughter kept saying no, Jen apparently said, "Well, your mom is just being stubborn and doesn't want you to have fun with me." Hearing that made my blood boil. It's one thing for Jen to have her own fantasies about bonding with my kids, but trying to turn my daughter against me? That's a line you don't cross. I immediately documented everything my daughter told me in the co-parenting app. I wrote a detailed note to my ex, explaining that Jen's behavior was inappropriate and manipulative. I reiterated that our daughter didn't want to join cheerleading and that Jen needed to stop pressuring her, especially by making negative comments about me. His response? He brushed it off, saying, "You're blowing this out of proportion. Jen's just trying to be nice. Maybe if you stopped being so hostile, our daughter wouldn't feel like she has to choose sides." That was the last straw. I told him in no uncertain terms that if Jen continued to push or made any further attempts to alienate my daughter from me, I'd have no choice but to involve a mediator or revisit our custody arrangement. After my last conversation with my ex, I hoped things would calm down. I was clear about my boundaries, and I thought Jen might finally back off. Unfortunately, I underestimated how persistent she could be. This time, instead of directly pushing my daughter to join cheerleading, Jen decided to take a more subtle approach. When the kids came home from their next visit, my daughter had a bag of cheerleading gear, pom-poms, a practice uniform, and even a pair of cheer shoes. Where did this come from? I asked my daughter, trying to keep my voice calm. Jen got it for me, she said, looking uncomfortable. She said it was just a gift, but I don't want it. I could see the frustration in her eyes. She knew I wasn't going to be happy about this, and honestly, neither was she. My daughter didn't even want to bring the bag home, but Jen insisted she take it. I immediately documented the incident in the co-parenting app, making a note that Jen was continuing to disregard boundaries by giving our daughter cheer gear despite knowing she didn't want to participate. I also messaged my ex, telling him this was unacceptable and needed to stop immediately. The response: my ex's reply was predictably dismissive. Jen was just trying to do something nice for our daughter, he wrote. She's not forcing her to use it. She's just giving her the option in case she changes her mind. This infuriated me. How many times does a 10-year-old need to say no before they take her seriously? It felt manipulative, like they were trying to wear her down until she gave in. I replied firmly, this is not about giving her options. It's about respecting her boundaries. Our daughter has been clear that she doesn't want to do cheerleading, and Jen's actions are making her uncomfortable. If this continues, we'll need to discuss this with a mediator. My daughter speaks out. Later that evening, my daughter came to me holding the bag of cheer gear. She looked so conflicted, like she didn't know what to do. Mom, can we just donate this stuff? She asked. I don't want it, and I don't want Jen to think I'm going to use it. I hugged her and told her how proud I was of her for standing up for herself. Together, we boxed up the gear, and I promised her we'd donate it to a local community center, where it could go to a child who actually wanted to cheer. We also talked about how she could handle Jen in the future. I reassured her that it was okay to say no, and that she didn't have to take gifts or participate in activities that made her uncomfortable. Escalating the issue. By this point, I knew I needed to take more action. Jen's behavior wasn't just annoying, it was creating unnecessary stress for my daughter. I scheduled a meeting with a family mediator to address the situation. During the mediation session, I laid out everything that had happened: the repeated pressure to join cheer, the negative comments about me, and now the unwanted gifts. I emphasized how much this was upsetting my daughter, and how important it was for Jen to respect her boundaries. My ex and Jen were defensive, of course. Jen claimed she just wanted to support our daughter, and accused me of being controlling. She said, "You're so focused on being in charge that you're not letting me have a relationship with the kids." The mediator, thankfully, wasn't buying it. They made it clear that this wasn't about control. It was about respecting a child's autonomy. They told Jen and my ex that continuing to push cheerleading or anything else against my daughters would not be in the kids' best interest, and could result in legal consequences if the situation escalated further. After the mediation session, I thought Jen and my ex might finally understand the importance of boundaries. For a while, everything was quiet. No new cheerleading mentions, no more unwanted gifts, and no tense messages through the co-parenting app. I started to hope they'd finally let the issue rest. But then Jen found a new angle. About 2 weeks after the mediation, my daughter came home from her dad's house looking upset. When I asked her what was wrong, she hesitated before saying, "Jen didn't talk about cheerleading, but she kept saying how much she wishes she could do something special with me, like a mother-daughter thing." Apparently, Jen spent the entire weekend laying it on thick. She talked about how she always dreamed of having a daughter to bond with, and how sad she was that she couldn't have children of her own. Then she pivoted to saying things like, "You're so lucky to have 2 moms who care about you, and I just want to be the kind of mom you can do fun things with." My daughter told me it made her feel really uncomfortable, but she didn't know how to respond. She said Jen didn't outright mention cheerleading, but the implication was clear. Jen wanted her to do something like cheerleading to fulfill her own unmet desires. Hearing this made my blood boil. It wasn't just about cheer anymore. It was about emotional manipulation. Jen wasn't respecting my daughter's boundaries. She was trying to guilt her into creating the relationship Jen wanted. Confronting my ex, I immediately documented everything in the co-parenting app and sent my ex a message. I need you to talk to Jen about her behavior during the kids' visits. Our daughter has expressed that she feels uncomfortable with the way Jen talks about wanting to be her other mom and doing mother-daughter activities. This kind of emotional pressure is not okay, and it needs to stop. His response was predictably defensive. Jen is just trying to connect with the kids. She's not doing anything wrong, and you're overreacting. If anything, you're the one making our daughter feel uncomfortable by constantly undermining Jen and making her feel unwelcome. That was the last straw for me. I told him flat out that if Jen continued to pressure our daughter, whether it was about cheerleading or anything else, I would take legal action to ensure my kids' emotional well-being was protected. Talking to my daughter. After dealing with my ex, I sat down with my daughter for a serious conversation. I wanted her to feel supported and empowered. So I explained that it was okay to feel uncomfortable, and that she didn't have to put up with anything that made her unhappy. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, I told her. If Jen or anyone else makes you feel pressured, you can say no. And if they keep pushing, you can always come to me. I'll handle it. She nodded, but I could tell she was still uneasy. What if she gets mad? She asked quietly. I reassured her that it wasn't her job to manage Jen's feelings. You're a kid, and your job is to be yourself and do what makes you happy. It's the adult's job to respect your boundaries, no matter how they feel about it. Involving a therapist. Given how much this situation was affecting my daughter, I decided it was time to involve a professional. I reached out to a child therapist to help her navigate these complicated feelings and give her tools to handle situations like this in the future. During our first session, the therapist validated my daughter's feelings and emphasized how important it was for her to have a safe space to express herself. They worked on strategies for setting boundaries, saying no, and managing guilt when adults tried to manipulate her emotions. I felt a wave of relief watching my daughter open up to someone outside the family. It was clear she needed this support, and I wished I'd thought of it sooner. Jen's reaction. When my ex found out I'd taken our daughter to therapy, he was furious. You're making this into a bigger deal than it is, he said. Jen's just trying to build a relationship with her, and now you're poisoning our daughter against her. I calmly reminded him that I was doing what was best for our daughter's mental health, and that if Jen hadn't crossed so many boundaries, therapy wouldn't have been necessary. Jen needs to focus on being a supportive stepmom, not trying to replace me or force a relationship that isn't natural, I said. He didn't respond, but I could tell he was seething. A shift in dynamics. Since starting therapy, my daughter has become more confident in standing up for herself. On her next visit with her dad and Jen, she told Jen directly that she didn't want to hear any more talk about mother-daughter activities or how lucky she was to have two moms. When she came home, she seemed proud of herself but admitted it was hard. Jen didn't say much after that, she told me, but I think she was upset. I told her how proud I was of her for speaking up. You're allowed to set boundaries even with adults, I said, and it's not your responsibility to make other people happy. After weeks of relative calm, things have taken another turn. I genuinely thought Jen might finally respect the boundaries my daughter set, but it seems I was wrong. This time, Jen decided to take a completely different approach, one that felt even more manipulative. My daughter came home from her most recent visit with her dad looking upset again. She hesitated before telling me what had happened, but when she did, I was livid. The manipulation. During her visit, Jen apparently told my daughter a story about how much she struggled growing up without a close bond with her own mother. She went on and on about how lonely and isolated she felt as a child, and how she'd always dreamed of being able to give a little girl the love and connection she never had. She said she just wants me to be happy, my daughter told me, looking confused and torn. But it felt like she was trying to make me feel bad for not wanting to spend time with her. The kicker? Jen ended the conversation by saying something like, "It's okay if you don't want to cheer or do things with me. I just hope you know how much it hurts me, but I'll learn to live with it." This wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was guilt-tripping a 10-year-old into feeling responsible for an adult's emotional well-being. My daughter felt trapped, like no matter what she said or did, Jen would twist it into something painful for herself. My response. Once again, I documented everything in the co-parenting app and sent a detailed message to my ex. This behavior has gone too far, I wrote. Jen is now trying to manipulate our daughter by guilt-tripping her and making her feel responsible for Jen's emotions. This is inappropriate and harmful. I expect you to address this immediately and ensure it doesn't happen again. If it does, I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter legally. His response was infuriating but unsurprising. He accused me of exaggerating and claimed that Jen's comments were harmless and meant to show vulnerability. She's just trying to share her feelings, he said. There's nothing wrong with being open about your emotions. I replied, there's a difference between being open about your emotions and putting an emotional burden on a child. Jen's behavior crosses that line. And if you can't see that, you're enabling her to continue causing harm. Setting clearer boundaries, I decided it was time to sit down with my daughter again and reinforce the tools she'd been learning in therapy. I told her, Jen's feelings are her responsibility, not yours. It's okay to be kind and respectful, but you don't have to feel guilty for saying no or setting boundaries. You have the right to decide who you're comfortable with and what you want to do. My daughter nodded, but I could tell she still felt conflicted. What if she gets mad at me again? She asked. Then that's on her, I said firmly. Adults are supposed to manage their own feelings. It's not your job to fix them or make them happy. To give her more confidence, we practiced a few ways she could respond if Jen tried to guilt-trip her again. Things like, I'm sorry you feel that way, but this is what I'm comfortable with. I don't want to talk about this right now. I'd rather focus on having fun today. We also talked about how it's okay to tell her dad when she feels uncomfortable, and to always let me know if anything crosses a line. Involving the therapist again, I updated my daughter's therapist about what had happened, and they agreed this was a clear case of emotional manipulation. They recommended we continue working on boundary setting and gave me additional tools to help my daughter navigate these situations. One suggestion was to create a safe space journal where my daughter could write down her feelings after visits with her dad and Jen. This would give her an outlet to process her emotions and help her feel less overwhelmed. Legal consultation. At this point, I realized it might be time to revisit custody arrangements. I consulted with my lawyer to discuss my options. While my ex hasn't directly violated any custody agreements, Jen's behavior is creating a hostile and emotionally unhealthy environment for my daughter. My lawyer advised me to keep documenting everything and to consider requesting a modification to the custody order if Jen's actions continue. We could potentially push for supervised visitation or additional stipulations to protect the kid's emotional well-being. The calm before the storm. Since I confronted my ex about Jen's latest behavior, things have been eerily quiet. No new incidents, no messages from my ex, and no comments from my daughter about feeling uncomfortable during visits. While I'd like to believe this means they're finally respecting boundaries, I can't shake the feeling that Jen is just biding her time until the next opportunity. For now, I'm focusing on keeping my daughter empowered and supported. She's doing better emotionally, but I hate that she even has to deal with this kind of stress. It's not fair to her, and it's not fair to our family. After weeks of relative calm, Jen couldn't help herself. I knew it was only a matter of time before she made another move, but I wasn't prepared for how brazen it would be. My daughter came home from her most recent visit visibly upset. When I asked what was wrong, she handed me a piece of paper. It was a printed schedule for a cheerleading program, one that Jen had already signed her up for. She said it was just a trial, and that it would be fun, my daughter said, looking down at her feet. She told me I'd love it if I just gave it a chance. But I don't want to do it, Mom. I was furious. This wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was a blatant disregard for the boundaries we had repeatedly set. Jen had gone behind my back and signed my daughter up for an activity she explicitly said she didn't want to do. I immediately documented everything, including the schedule and what my daughter told me. Then I messaged my ex through the co-parenting app, stating in no uncertain terms that Jen's behavior was unacceptable and had officially crossed the line. Signing our daughter up for cheerleading without my consent and against her will is a violation of our custody agreement, I wrote. This is the last time I'm addressing this issue informally. If it happens again, I will take legal action. His response was dismissive as usual. He claimed I was overreacting, and that Jen had only signed her up for a free trial. So it's not that serious. It is that serious, I replied. She has no right to make decisions for our children without my agreement. This stops now. That was the breaking point for me. The very next day, I met with my lawyer and filed for a custody modification. I requested that Jen be barred from making any decisions regarding our children, and that her interactions with them be limited to supervised settings. The process wasn't easy, and it took several weeks to get a court date. In the meantime, I kept documenting every interaction and continued supporting my daughter through therapy. She was doing better emotionally, but the constant back and forth with Jen was taking a toll on her. At the hearing, I presented all the evidence I had. The instances of emotional manipulation, the unwanted gifts, the guilt-tripping conversations, and finally, the unauthorized cheerleading sign-up. My daughter's therapist provided a statement emphasizing the negative impact Jen's behavior was having on her emotional well-being. Jen tried to defend herself, claiming she only wanted to build a relationship with her stepdaughter, and that I was alienating the kids from her. My ex doubled down, accusing me of being vindictive and refusing to move on from the past. But the judge wasn't buying it. They focused on the fact that Jen's actions consistently disregarded both my daughter's wishes and the co-parenting agreement. In the end, the court ruled in my favor. Jen was barred from making any decisions about the children or signing them up for activities. My ex was ordered to ensure Jen respected these boundaries, with the understanding that failure to do so could result in further legal consequences. The court also increased my custody time, limiting my ex's access to weekends only and requiring that Jen's involvement during those visits remain minimal and supervised. Since the court ruling, things have been much quieter. My ex was furious about losing custody time, but I think even he realized there was no point in fighting it further. Jen, for her part, seems to have finally backed off. My daughter is doing much better now that the pressure is gone. She's thriving in school, and has even started exploring her own interests, ones she chose herself. I've continued to encourage her to set boundaries and advocate for herself, and I couldn't be prouder of how far she's come. Looking back, I can't believe how much this situation escalated. All I wanted was for my kids to feel safe, respected, and supported, and I refused to let anyone, not even their father or his wife, take that away from them. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that standing up for your kids is never easy, but it's always worth it. I know I made the right decision by fighting for their well-being, even when it felt like an uphill battle. To any parents out there dealing with overstepping step-parents or difficult co-parenting dynamics, trust your instincts, document everything, and don't be afraid to seek help when you need it. Your kids deserve nothing less. For now, I'm focusing on my kids, our healing, and moving forward. I hope this is the end of the cheerleading saga, and any other unnecessary drama Jen might dream up. But if it's not, I'll be ready.